Hi friends, host Eric here, host Talking with Famous People, and I just watched and want to respond to Frank James's video from, I don't know, not that long ago actually, a recent video called INFJ Relationships, but INFJs Needing a Partner. So, I floated. I was going to sign the big coach, I wrote down all the things he said. And I thought it was a really good video. I thought it was great. Very insightful. And I liked everything he said because it made me feel as though he's really describing that INFJs need ENTP. Now, he says early on in the video that it doesn't make sense to go into looking for a relationship by saying, I'm going to find this type of person. And he makes a good argument as to why. He says, because people don't go around with a sign over them, some floating symbol over them that says what type they are, and it's not really practical to assume you're going to be able to type everybody before you date them. So it's a great reason to not include type in your initial considerations of dating. You can't really rely on other people's typing of themselves either. So anyway, this is what he says INFJ needs in a partner. Now, he also says what partners should need from their partner in order to be correctly matched with an INFJ, which I think is great. He's got 5 things that the INFJ needs the partner to be. Somebody spontaneous is the first thing he says, to sort of compensate for the settled quality of the INFJ with the NI dom, you know. I would call that a compensatory need. So it's like INFJ needs somebody to compensate for their lack of spontaneity, is what he's saying. The second thing he says is a clear self-concept. And interestingly, you know, he is an INFJ for sure, and a very self-aware one, because he notes that INFJs don't necessarily have very clear self-concept of themselves. They are ignoring their own FI, for example. And so if they get somebody else who's equally unclear on their self-concept, it can lead to sort of an ontological, where do you want to eat party. Number 3, they need somebody who can correct them or indicate things like, or bring them back down to earth. In other words, they need somebody who can guide their expression of their NI in ways that are more communicatively successful, I guess. Which is another interesting observation, because, of course, INFJs are generally very communicatively successful, as Frank James himself is evidence of. But that's the problem. And he's describing somebody, the INFJ needs somebody who's very nuanced, because the INFJ is very nuanced. They need somebody who's going to be able to, when appropriate, say, your NI frame's too limiting, but assume that's the exception, not the rule. Number 4, he says, is they need somebody who can talk with them and deal with the metaphysicality of their talking. It could be another NF, he says, or it could be a non-NF, and says that some non-NFs are fascinated by INFJs, although a lot of people will get sick of the level of abstraction. So they need somebody who's not going to get sick of it, either another NF or somebody who's not an NF but is fascinated by it. Well, I like that because, of course, it indicates to me that INFJ is the right partner for me. So far, so good, right? Number 5. The 5th thing he says is they need somebody empathetic who won't test your boundaries. And that is really so true. It's like, for both ENTP and INFJ, if somebody's testing my boundaries, it's generally fine. But my whole point is I want to be on the same page with you. Boundary testers are not on the same page with you. They're trying to seize the page. And it's conceivable that sometimes I will push upon one of Rachel's boundaries, but if I do so, it's unintentional, and in the process, I'll learn, oh, this is a boundary, and I won't push on that anymore. I don't like her to feel that their boundaries are tested. I can tell what Frank James indicates here and respect the fact that INFJs don't necessarily have the best natural boundary defense. They can be taken advantage of. And, of course, knowing this and understanding INFJs means, for an ENTP anyway, for me, who feels ownership of other people's feelings, then I go, okay, well, I got to make sure definitely not to test any boundaries because she's not very good at defending them. So then, those are the 5 things. I don't repeat them just for clarity's sake. Number 1 was somebody spontaneous. Number 2, somebody with a clear self-concept. Number 3, somebody who can correct but isn't defaulting to you're wrong. Number 4, somebody who likes and won't get sick of all the abstract conversation. Number 5, somebody who's empathetic and doesn't attempt to test boundaries unnecessarily, or generally tries to avoid testing them at all. Then he gave 3 things that the INFJ is looking for a person who themselves needs. So, like let's talk about Susanna Marie. Susanna Marie is a random INFJ lady, and she's looking for a mate. She should be looking for a mate who needs these 3 things. Somebody who needs a good listener, but has a subtle touch. Somebody who doesn't mind being gently unraveled, or would actually like to be gently unraveled. So INFJs sort of instinctually, reflexively deconstruct the identity of the people they encounter, so as to get to the NI gist of the engine of that person. Some people don't want to be unraveled. The more defensive a person is again, it links back to self-concept. The clearer one's self-concept, and the more secure a person is in his or her ontology, the less resistance is going to be towards another person unraveling you. But there's another factor in that too, which is the more extroverted a person is, the less resistance in general there will be to being unraveled, because for me, I see my self-concept as being determined externally, kind of. The second one is they need someone who wants unique perspectives. Now, I think what he really means here is an INFJ needs to be somebody who wants their intuitive insights and finds them useful, delightful, true, whatever. So, in other words, somebody who likes NI. Number 1 then would be somebody who's an extrovert, who's secure. Number 2 is somebody who likes NI, values it. And number 3 says someone who seeks an advice giver. And then he talks at the end about this conundrum, this weird almost contradiction, that the INFJ needs somebody who's very solid on their identity, but also open to advice, who is pleased by the benefit, but is pleased by taking benefit of the INFJ's NI, truth, and FE, grace, but who doesn't need it. It's basically like the INFJ wants the ideal credit card applicant. Somebody who's already got great credit, only has 1 credit card, doesn't even need that, but is seeking a second card for backup. Well, a credit card company, of course, wants to give you a credit card because your credit's perfect, you've always paid everything on time, but you carry a little bit of debt so that the credit card company makes money. It's like it's difficult to be that person. The equivalent in the analogy here, difficult to be that person and also be single, or also be, to get that person, because presumably they've got a lot of dating capital. All right, so let's listen to this end part. I like what he says here. Let me put me on mute for a second. Yeah, like so.
Like I sort of am interested in having some guidance. It's an interesting thing to have someone who's solid on their identity but is also sort of open to advice. That shows that it's a very healthy, well-balanced person who isn't just all in on, no, I know what to do, I don't need to hear what you say, but isn't all just like, oh crap, I need you to tell me what to do. It's like a healthy balance of, they know that they don't have all the answers, but they also are solid enough on themselves to be like, I feel confident in who I am. There you go. Those are the traits you should be looking for in a perspective.
Okay, so I found that interesting for a couple of reasons. First of all, it does link to kind of stage of development and where one is in terms of one's self-concept, but it also links more to type bias than I think is initially drawn from that. Like, there are only certain kinds of types that express their optimization in that kind of straddling the fence, both balancing against multiple universal vectors like that. So, in other words, he's a meta-analyst, and he's saying, and the thing he's describing at the end there is attained by well-developed meta-analyst types. It's not inherently a preferable way to be. A lot of times, being solid on the identity does not correlate with being open to advice, and that's not a bad thing necessarily. Depending on the clarity of the vision that's being implemented, or the specificity of it, I guess you could say, a lot of times what's required in terms of leadership is stick-to-itiveness rather than openness. So the challenge is the kind of leadership and the sort of thing being led about. The more specific the mission, the less openness is needed. The less specific the mission, the more openness is needed. So, for example, having a kind of a leader that isn't open to advice while concurrently being very solid about his vision as president is a disaster. You need to have somebody who's what Frank James says there, and ultimately that's going to be attained by the meta-analyst types, INFJ, ENFJ, ENTP, INTP, and it's not exactly it's not normative in the way that he indicates here. It's situationally normative in the way I indicate. But regardless, much of what he says here seems to break down to me as describing qualities of the meta-analyst types. Not the first one, someone spontaneous. That's not linked to that. Or I would note that that's compensatory, as is the can correct, cut out your BS, INFJ. That's another compensatory thing they're looking for. And the first one, someone spontaneous, and the third one, can correct, cut out BS. Those don't necessarily link to meta-analyst types, because that links more to action types. Okay, so INFJ needs an action type. That's 1 and 3. 2, the clear self-concept thing. That's gonna be contraindicative, probably, of meta-analyst types in general. So, and that one's complementary rather than, well, it's kind of compensatory too, I guess he's saying, because INFJ lacks clear self-concept. So, number 2 might be indicative that ENTP is not a good type for INFJ, because ENTPs typically don't have very clear self-concept either. Number 4, way of talking, metaphysical, that's links directly to the meta-analyst types. Number 5, empathetic won't test your boundaries. Also, I believe meta-analyst types in general are empathetic in that fashion. They don't like to test boundaries, and they don't like to have boundaries tested, because that pushes things down into the physical world realm, where it's like, okay, so now we're not just talking abstractly about this. You're compelling me to make some sort of decision. You're forcing action into the equation. And then here, what do they need? They need a good listener, but has subtle touch. You can be gently unraveled. And they're really talking about a meta-analyst type, somebody who's very interested in engaging in the TE pointlessness of being a meta-analyst. Number two, someone who wants your unique perspectives. Again, somebody who's not going to battle with you over framing. So the reason INFJs and ENTPs don't battle over framing is they both think it's everyone's party and no one should cry. Now, since I did that only in a live stream, let me articulate what I'm saying here about parties and crying. It's my party and I'll cry if I want to. Particularist frame, particularist tool. It's my party and no one should cry. Particularist frame, universal tool. It's everyone's party and I'll cry if I want to. Universal frame, particularist tool. It's everyone's party and no one should cry. Universal frame, universal tool. So, basically, on this, someone who wants unique perspectives, what he's really trying to get at, I think, is avoid conflicts over frame and tool, particularist, universalist stuff. When I explain to you why this is, you're going to say it's a unique perspective because almost always things have a teleological element. Only the meta-analysts avoid the teleology like that. So we want to talk about ideas that don't have any particular application necessarily, that don't link to any particular case, that aren't useful to any particular person for any particular reason, that instead attain legitimacy on universal metrics. And then the last one, this idea of being solid on identity but open to advice. Well, I think that also links to meta-analyst types because we're not really solid on the identity. That's a developmental phase for meta-analyst types. It's a later development phase, or it's a optimization phase, or a state of optimization, you might say. But open to advice is definitely a meta-analyst thing because all the meta-analysts have the disinterested deliberative function, TI, and then they have either the universal knowledge function, NI, or the universal action function, NE, above the particularist equivalent in the stack. So anyway, I really enjoyed that video. I thought Frank James had a lot of good insights, and I think he nailed it, really. I think the 8 things that he discusses there as being important are all distinct from one another, so he's not just repeating himself. It's well edited. It's easy to flow. It's well organized, and he's totally right about it. There's nothing I disagree with here. And it also seems to validate my relationship. I would say the best answer to this question, what INFJ needs in a relationship partner, is an ENTP, possibly an INTP. You could conceivably argue an ENFJ, but I don't think an ENFJ-INFJ relationship would work that great, ultimately, long term. I mean, I think INFJs really need an ENTP. Now, you could also argue that some ESTPs, the more abstract of them, will also stand up on many of these judging rubrics, but they probably ultimately will have the biggest problem with number one, needs a good listener who has a subtle touch, who doesn't mind being gently unraveled. I don't think the touch of the ESTPs in the metaphysical realm is very subtle, really. They're not unpowerful in the metaphysical realm, but they're not. It's more of a tool and less of an art. Okay, so thanks for watching very much, and check out Frank. You've probably already watched Frank James. He's great. I like him. But thanks for Frank James for making that video. That was interesting. And have a nice day.